Subscribe for more.
At the time, my son Will was getting married. I had long dreamed of the day when I would see my son standing at the altar, happy and proud. But this wedding ceremony was different in a strange way. I didn't expect to come upon something like this. My worry was not the wedding itself, but the bride. Angelina Jolie had all the traits that a father would want in a daughter-in-law. Smart, beautiful, and successful, with an air of perfection. But there was one thing she didn't know about me: she thought I was poor. 3 years ago, my wife died, and I stopped being involved in the world. I didn't want to be a bother to anyone, especially my child. So, I made things easier. I lived in a little studio apartment in Venice, drove a Honda Civic that was 10 years old, and wore clothes I bought at Walmart. Money was no longer a factor in the situation. It has to do with staying alive. Mourning is moving on to the next level. Will knew that I worked in the special effects field, but he didn't know how much money I had made. Disney bought my company, which used to be a big deal in Hollywood, for millions of dollars. Because I owned the patents for prosthetics technology, I still was paid on a regular basis. Will didn't know that my net worth was $53 million. No one did that. And didn't know about that, and she didn't care about it. As soon as I saw her, it was clear that she saw me as simply another old man, someone she felt sorry for. I didn't say anything about what happened in my past. I didn't want to make a scene. But I could see how she looked at me and treated me like I was less than her. It all started with the first dinner we had together. Will and both asked me to join them at a trendy place in West Hollywood. And hardly noticed me because she was so focused on her phone. When the server asked her about the wine, she quickly said, "Whatever's cheapest." Will responded, "We are also paying for Denzel." He was so embarrassed that he tried to say he was sorry, but I didn't say anything back. I didn't want to make a scene. After that, they brought out dessert. Anne's face showed a fake look of worry as she walked ahead. "Will told me that you are between jobs, Denzel. Have you thought about elder services? There are programs out there that help people like you." Even though what she said hurt me deeply, I was able to keep my cool. I have been through worse things before. Her tone was not one of worry, it was one of condescension. She said, in a tone that was almost too sweet, "We would like to be of assistance. Maybe we could help you find a nice assisted living facility to live in. Nothing too fancy, but clean and safe." I didn't say anything because I was dumbfounded. I had a sense something was about to happen. She cared about her image, but not about me. In her view, I was a burden that needed to be gotten rid of and kept out of sight. I stayed quiet at the table. I didn't have to say anything. I knew what type of person Anne was, and I knew that I would have to examine her character to see if she was really worthy of being with Will. That night, I made a decision. I was going to let her show me who she really was. The next few months showed that I was right. Every time Anne and I met, I could tell that she was uncomfortable, and it seemed to be getting worse. Will gave me a seat at the children's table at his birthday party. As she walked by, she muttered, "This will be more appropriate for your level." That wasn't the end of it, though. When they started looking for a new place to live, she made sure to tell me that I wasn't welcome. "It's a place for young professionals," she said. "You would feel like you don't belong." During the party they threw to celebrate their engagement, and introduced me to her parents as Will's father. "Since his wife died, he has been having a hard time," she said. "We are keeping an eye on him," her mother said, looking at me with sympathy. Her father, on the other hand, barely acknowledged my presence. The real problem, though, came up when Anne started getting ready for the wedding. I heard her say, "Will, we need to talk about your father," and I thought, what about him? Will asked. He'll make us look bad, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Look at him. That clothes that are no longer in style. That look of having been beaten up. I stood outside their door and listened. And kept talking, saying, that is exactly what I am trying to say here. He looks like he should be in a nursing home instead of at our wedding. Can't you clean him up? Buy him a nice suit? At that point, I was sure I had to do something. I thought it was completely wrong for Anne to treat me this way, and I wasn't going to be quiet about it. It was time to test her and see how much more she could do. She would treat me like I was worthless if she thought I was poor. But if she thought I was weak and vulnerable, she would hurt me even more than she does now. I got in touch with some old friends at Hollywood FX Studios. I told them I needed a big favor from them. In just 2 weeks, I was entirely changed. The wheelchair was made to medical standards and was of the highest quality. The oxygen tank seemed real, but it was just a fake. The prosthetics made my hands shake in a way that seemed real. The glycerin drool seemed so real that it broke my heart. I spent hours preparing my slurred speech and confused facial expressions for the rehearsals. I was supposed to play a man who had recently had a stroke and was still getting better. As soon as we looked at one another, Will was filled with sadness. What happened, Father? His voice was full of worry when he asked. I mumbled that it had come on suddenly and that the doctor had said I had a stroke. When Will started to check me, I was confused and tried to avoid him, even though I knew that his background in physical therapy would have helped. I made up some excuses about specialists that were just believable enough to make them look real. Anne's answer was better than I could have hoped for. When she saw me in the wheelchair for the first time, she pulled back in disgust and said to Will, "Oh my God. How bad is the situation?" The following is a quote, and didn't want Will to comfort her when he tried to. She didn't think twice before saying, "He can't show up at the wedding looking like this." Look at him, she remarked as she turned to Will. I know he is my dad. But this day is ours, it's the perfect day for us. That's when I knew I had won her over. I wouldn't be able to get that in all of our pictures. There was a lot of work to do before the wedding, and it was a whirlwind of activity in the days leading up to it. I was getting more worried, but Will was doing his best to keep his excitement and fear for me in check. He would call me every day to see how I was doing, and his voice would be full of worry. How are you doing, Dad? How is the healing going? I kept up the act, talking in slow, slurred sentences and acting like I couldn't remember everything. I could see the pain in his eyes and the humiliation he felt for my sickness. But I couldn't back down. I had no other alternative except to tell and to keep going. As the wedding day got closer, Anne's true self became more and more clear. She wouldn't look me in the eye and would always find a reason to leave the room while I was present. She acted like my existence was disgusting to her, like I was an obligation she had to deal with because of Will. She did things on purpose to show me how little she cared about me, and they were sneaky and cowardly. The day before the wedding, she called me. I was surprised when the phone rang. My old cell phone was on the counter, vibrating gently. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to know what she would say if she believed I wasn't paying attention to her. I picked up the phone after it rang 6 times and pretended that I couldn't get the words out. Hello? Here's a quote, Denzel, it's Anne, she said in a calm, professional voice, as if she were talking to a patient. We need to talk. And, hello, dear, I began, acting like the confused old man I was supposed to be. Today has been on my mind ever since it happened. The wedding or the marriage ceremony, and I believe that it would be best if you did not come, she said honestly. We're just trying to make sure that everything goes perfectly. Will has been under a lot of stress, so there are some things that we think it would be best if you weren't there. I let the silence go on for a little while so she would believe I was taking my time to think about things. But it's Will's wedding, I said, stretching out each word. Yes, I know that. I will make sure you see everything, she responded, her voice suddenly turning sickeningly sweet. Someone will call you on FaceTime and stay on the line for the whole ceremony. That's all there is to it, you'll be there in person. It wasn't just the words. Each syllable she spoke dripped with fake concern. I would like to see my son get married, I said in a low voice, letting my voice waver just enough to make it sound weak. I know that. And you will too. Just not face to face, she said, her voice losing its fake warmth. You will be more comfortable at home, where you are safe. The word safe hung in the air like a poisonous toxin, filling the space with its presence. I knew what she meant when she said, "You're a burden. Here is not a place where we want you." The conversation went on and on because she kept making excuses. Denzel, can I be honest with you? She said it like she was going to show concern, but I could hear the coldness in her voice. You are not in good health. I mean, look at you. You can't even sit up straight. What are the chances that you will have another stroke during the ceremony? What happens if you fall out of your wheelchair? What happens if you make those noises? She spoke in a chilly, planned way to make me feel small and irrelevant. I could tell that she was trying to get me to give in by making me feel bad. We've put so much time and effort into this wedding, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. $200,000. You can't be allowed to mess things up like this. I stayed quiet, which made her think I wasn't strong enough to answer. And honestly, Denzel, you look terrible, she said at the end. You are too fragile to be at the wedding right now. You need to promise not to make a scene. She was trying to take charge of the tale and keep me out of my son's life. I didn't answer because I didn't need to. I had heard everything I needed to hear. She had already made up her mind about what to do. I understand, I said, doing what I was supposed to do. Good, she said with a sigh of relief. We'll call you after the reception. Please promise me that you will take care of yourself. The following is a quote. I took my time putting the phone back on its holder. The test was going perfectly. I had pushed her, and she had failed in a big way. Finally, it was time to start playing the real game. I was ready to go on the morning of the wedding. I had spent hours getting into character. I put on the prosthetics in layers, set up the oxygen tank, and adjusted the wheelchair. I did all of this to make everything look as real as possible. It wasn't just about looking the part, I also had to convince everyone around me that it was real. I came by early so that Will could check on me. When he saw me, he looked like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but his expression quickly changed to one of sadness as he watched me struggle to sit down. He was a great son, but he didn't know the truth. All of the shaking of his hands, the drooling, and all of the other signs I showed were part of an elaborate ruse, but he didn't know this. He muttered, "Dad, you don't have to do this." His voice was low and it broke as he said, "I don't want to see you like this." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence remain, letting him keep thinking that I couldn't talk or understand. He sat next to me for a few minutes, lost in thought. I could tell he was thinking hard because I could see the wheels turning in his head. He then said in a low voice, "You've been acting strange lately. The symptoms you're having. They don't all fit together. Your words are slurring, and your hands are shaking less than they were before. Are you really okay?" I let out a faint sigh that was just loud enough for him to think I was confused. It's just incredibly hard, Will, I responded, trying to sound as sure as I could. He was more worried and said, "I think you should see a doctor." You should obtain a doctor's advice on this problem. There is something wrong with this situation. The day after tomorrow, okay, I said quietly, giving him just enough to keep him from going any further. And walked in through the door, and the sound of her perfect bridal dress rustling behind her as she walked in. She smiled at Will for a second before looking at me. "Come on, Will," she said. "We must get to the place right now. Everything is in place and ready to go." I could tell that Will was already having trouble with himself, but he waited to answer. He wanted to stay with me, but he knew he couldn't. I faked a weak smile and said, "I'll be fine." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll be fine." Will cast one last glance in my direction before leaving unwillingly. I sat still for a moment to let the experience sink in. I wouldn't be at the wedding, which would go on as planned. But this was just the start of the decline that would eventually happen to Anne. I got to the wedding at the Los Angeles Medical Center at exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, just as the ceremony was about to start. It was ironic that Anne chose a hospital as the venue for her wedding because it was a place where people fought for their lives and cared for disabled children. Even though Anne acted like she was worried about me, the truth is that she only cared about her own interests. As soon as Sarah, the venue coordinator and a young woman, spotted me wheeling myself inside, she ran over and asked, "Are you okay, sir? Do you need help?" I kept my voice low and shaky, and I smiled the whole while. "Here for the wedding. Will Smith and Anne." Sarah nodded in understanding and said, "Oh, you must be the father of the groom." Miss Hathaway said, "You might need help," which was something she had said before. I nodded, and she brought me to the very back row of the venue. She took me to a spot behind a pillar, away from the main event. "This will make you more comfortable," she said. I sat still and watched the guests arrive. Anne's family, dressed in their expensive designer clothes and jewelry, filled the first rows. Will's family sat further back. I couldn't help but notice how different the two sides were. Will's side was warm and full of real people with real jobs, while Anne's side was full of people who were more concerned with how they looked than anything else. I watched as the ceremony began. Will was at the altar, waiting for his wife to arrive. He looked around the room for me. The moment our eyes met, his face turned red with relief. I nodded gently, trying to show him how much I loved him even though I was pretending to be someone else. He mouthed the words, "I love you, Dad." After that, Anne came in. She was beautiful. But as she walked down the aisle, she looked at me, and for a second, her perfect smile faltered. At that point, I realized the test was almost done. I was sitting behind a pillar at the back of the venue, out of sight of the guests, as the ceremony went on. When Anne walked down the aisle, her eyes were cold and her jaw was clenched. It felt like the air in the room changed. It was the first time I had really seen her for who she was, a woman who, despite all the good work she did in healthcare, couldn't see the value in a person who didn't meet her standards of perfection. He looked great in his tuxedo, but his eyes were full of worry as he scanned the crowd, desperately trying to find me. I could feel the tension in his shoulders and how hard he was trying to stay calm. But he wasn't doing this for the wedding, he was doing it for the event he was about to experience. His mother had died, and now his father was sick too. He was a shell of the man he used to be. Will's love for me was clear, but so was the fact that he was having a hard time. And made it to the altar, and for a split second, our eyes were fixed on each other. I could see her eyes become narrow and her lips become taut. It was clear to me now, I was a source of humiliation for her, a shadow that hung over her perfect day and that she did not want there. I cast my eyes in her direction, letting her be aware of my presence and that I had no intention of leaving. Her expression of contempt was something that I could actually see and feel, and it was a manifestation of all of the things that I had dreaded. The thought of parting ways with me was something she was very much looking forward to. I mouthed the words, "I love you, Dad," from the altar, and I nodded back, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. I was shaking as I used my hand to wipe away the fake drool. I wasn't going to let her think she could win this game, even though it felt like the whole world was watching. I watched Will end and exchange vows, but I couldn't help but wonder if she would keep her word. She had already said what she thought about being sick, so I made my decision just before their kiss. The examination had gone on for long enough, and the moment had finally come. I pretended to mess with my phone, taking it out like I had done hundreds of times before during the fake illness. I opened my banking app and showed the world the screen, $53,247,891.43. That was the amount in my account, the money I got from selling my business to Disney, my technology investments, and my patents. When Anne saw what I was doing, her look changed for a time. She didn't know how much money I had or how much my assets were worth. She thought I was just a damaged guy in a wheelchair who drooled and needed her to live. But I wasn't. I stood up slowly and on purpose so that everyone in the room could see me. When I straightened my back and stopped being the weak, trembling man in the wheelchair, everyone gasped. My legs were strong and my hands were steady as I stepped forward with confidence. I turned off the oxygen tank, which made a loud hissing noise as I took off the nasal cannula and set it down like a prop that had been left behind. When I stepped up to the microphone at the head table, the ballroom went quiet. I could feel the eyes of 200 people on me, waiting for the truth to come out. But I was calm. I was in charge. I was finally able to get rid of the fake sickness, and the real me came out. Anne was shocked, and her mouth fell open. Her eyes widened in surprise, and she stumbled back. "That can't be true," she murmured to herself. "You were the stroke, you were the stroke." "No, Anne," I said, forcing my voice travel clearly through the hush. "There was never a stroke, it never happened at any point in time." When I took the microphone and changed it so I could talk to the group, the room seemed to go quiet and hold its breath. She turned away from me because her perfect wedding day was falling apart faster than she could keep up with it. "For the last 6 months," I replied, "I have been judging the woman who wants to marry my son. It was crucial for me to know who she really was. Everyone here will now know the truth about Anne Hathaway." The guests were still trying to figure out what was going on. People started to talk to each other in whispers, as if they couldn't understand what was going on in front of them. Anne's perfect disguise fell apart, leaving her face completely colorless. I looked at her and wasn't angry. Instead, I had a quiet, cold determination. I pointed to the wheelchair and said, "The wheelchair costs $12,000. They rented the oxygen tank. Hollywood FX Studios gave us the prosthetics, the shaking hands, and the drooling effects, and they cost $200,000. I could tell that Anne's hands were shaking a little bit when she grabbed for her drink, and her eyes were darting around the room like crazy. She had no idea how far I had gone to make this a test. She had trusted me, but now she was paying the price for not taking me seriously. After taking my phone out of my pocket, I held it up for everyone to see again. I showed her the recordings of the phone call she made to me that morning, where she screamed horrible things about me and acted like I was a burden to her. "And, you called me a vegetable," I said calmly, and my words echoed across the room. Someone said, "You called me disgusting. You acted like I didn't have the most basic parts of being human." Even though her face turned red with shame, she couldn't escape the truth now. There was no way to argue with the recordings, they were proof that could not be denied. I went on, "This is the part that makes it even more interesting. While you were planning your perfect wedding, I was making plans for my own. I have given $5 million to the National Disability Rights Network. The Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation got $2 million, and the United Spinal Association, the Paralyzed Veterans of America, and the Brain Injury Association each got $1 million. And looked like she was about to pass out. When she heard the numbers, she took a step back in shock. She had no idea what was going on around her. I have done everything I need to do to make sure that Will's trust will have $43 million. But there is a problem. If he stays married to you, who called disabled people vegetables, then the money will go to charity too. Will kept glancing back and forth between me and Anne, his expression utterly blank. He didn't sure what to do because he loved his wife, but the things he was seeing now were making him feel bad. I went over to Will and talked to him in a quiet voice. Son, I had to find out who she really was. I had to put her to the test. I'm sorry you had to see this, but you need to know. That is the identity she has. It was impossible to ignore the tension in the room as I saw Anne's disguise peel off completely. She had gone from being a peaceful newlywed to a lady caught in a web of lies she had made herself. I hit the send button on my phone and showed everyone the transaction on the big screen. I said, I've already sent the money. The cash was gone. It wasn't hers anymore, and it wasn't Will's anymore, but it was a reminder to everyone in the room of who Anne really was. There was no noise in the room, it was utterly quiet. No one said anything. Everyone stayed still. The room was quiet save for the faint sound of the oxygen tank hissing, which had been switched off. This thing had stood for what I thought was my weakness, but suddenly it was gone. There was no going back now, the truth had come out and couldn't be ignored. And stood in the back of the room with large eyes and tears running down her face. She was so scared and worried that her eyes were wide open, and she couldn't think of a single word to describe how confused she was. She was doing everything she could to figure out how to make sense of the mess she had made. She had planned the perfect wedding, but everything was falling apart. This was not because of anything I did, it was because of the decisions she had made. I turned to Will, who was still stuck at the altar. His face was white and his hands were shaking as he gazed back and forth between Anne and me. He didn't know what to do. I could see the pain in his eyes, as well as his confusion and sadness. This day was his wedding. The lady he loved was tearing it apart. The woman he had chosen to spend his life with. As I approached slowly and carefully toward him, each foot produced a noise in the now quiet room. The guests were still shocked. Some were filming the whole thing on their phones, while others stood by, not knowing what to say. I got to Will, and for a moment, we just stood there looking at each other. He was in a lot of pain since he loved his father and was romantically attached to his fiancée, at the same time. He had no idea that his world was about to change completely. I'm sorry you had to see this, Will, I said in a low voice. But you had to know who she really was. You needed to see the truth. Will shook his head as if he were trying to wake himself from a bad dream. Father. I have a gut feeling that something is wrong. I can't understand this. Why did you do this? What is stopping you from just letting me be happy? I took a deep breath to calm myself down. I did this because I love you, the father said to his son. Je voulais que tu aies un partenaire que tu valorises. Someone who places importance on family. Who treasures deference. It is not just about me, it is about the manner that Anne handled me, the way that she addressed me as a vegetable in front of everyone else. It is related to the type of person she is on the inside. And if she is able to treat her prospective father-in-law in such a manner, it is reasonable to assume that she will treat you in a similar kind once the honeymoon period is over. He understood what it meant, and his eyes got big. You think she's just acting? Everything was nothing more than a lie. I don't believe that, Will. I know that. Anne, who had been standing at the back of the room, finally stepped forward. Her voice shook and broke as she spoke. "Will, please. You don't know what you're talking about." I stopped her before she could say anything else. "Absolutely not, Anne. I don't think you understand. You just showed everyone here how you really feel about people with disabilities. You showed everyone here who you really are. There's no going back from this point on." Her calmness finally broke, and she started to shiver. "I really didn't mean what I said. I was under a lot of stress. It was the day of the marriage. I just wanted everything to be perfect," she murmured as she looked around the room, hoping the guests would understand. But it was too late. They all heard what she had to say. They had all seen her be cruel. Dr. Hathaway, Anne's uncle, moved forward with a serious look on his face. As a neurologist, I could see his professional side coming out. "Anne, you need to understand something. This isn't just about a wedding. It's about being a decent person and caring for others, no matter what their health or physical condition is." He turned to face the room and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Anne's actions and words today show how our healthcare system is failing in so many ways. The lack of compassion and understanding for people with disabilities is a systemic problem, and Anne, as a healthcare administrator, should know this." As soon as Dr. Hathaway spoke, the room filled with a buzzing sound of murmurs as the audience started to respond to his comments. Anne remained standing there, immobilized, her face reflecting remorse and a complete lack of color, and she was unable to come up with a response. However, it was no longer possible to do that. There was no turning back from the devastation that had already been inflicted. I was determined not to show any weakness even though the moment was putting a lot of pressure on me. Not right now. I wasn't going to give up after making so much progress. "Anne, you've made your choice," I said in a calm voice. "And I have reached my goal. My family doesn't want to talk to you. I will make it my job to make sure that everyone knows the truth about you." I turned my head to look at Will. He was still standing there, lost in meditation. "Son, you have 90 days to change your life. You need to make a choice. Do you want to be with someone who doesn't respect your family, or do you want to be with someone who truly cares about you and can help you through anything?" Will looked like he was about to break down when his eyes filled with tears for a short while. But after that, things began to change. He stood up straight and a determined look came over his face. For the first time, he spoke with confidence as he talked to Anne. Will's voice shook when he said, "Anne, I no longer know who you really are. But I do know one thing: I can't be with someone who thinks so little of other people. Especially my dad. It's fine. I'm sorry as well. I can't marry you." Anne's face twisted into a look of anger and disbelief. "There's no way you're being honest. You like him better than me, right?" "I am choosing respect," Will said, his voice steady. "And you have shown me that you don't have either of those qualities." And stepped back, her eyes full of tears. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of rage. "You will come to regret this," she cried, shaking with anger. "The two of you will come to rue this decision." Will, on the other hand, didn't seem scared at all. He stood up straight after making his choice. The guests had been quietly watching, and they started to talk among themselves. Some were shocked and shook their heads, while others quietly applauded Will's choice. Anne's bridal dress followed her like a ghost as she turned on her heel and marched out of the room. She didn't look back. At that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. I stood there with Will and watched Anne leave the room. The silence was so loud that it felt like a roar in my ears. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy. I felt relieved at that moment, but I knew that there would be consequences later. Will had made the right choice. I spoke to him in a softer tone than previously. I'm proud of you, son. You made the right choice. Will nodded his head, and his eyes filled with tears. I had to do it, father. I don't want to live a life where I have to hide who I am or who my family is. I smiled back at him, and the weight of everything lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't only about the money, it was also about dignity. Respect is something to be valued, and love is too. The room stayed quiet. Everyone was still trying to process what had just happened. Anne's leaving had left a big hole, like a heavy cloud lifting. I realized that it wasn't just the wedding that had gone wrong, Anne's plans for herself and Will had also been ruined. The guests slowly stood up from their chairs. Anne's whole world had fallen apart because she couldn't hide who she really was. Even though the effects were still being felt, the mood was one of finality. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again since Will had made his decision. The test was over, and now the effects were about to happen, not just for Anne, but for all of us as well. Will and I stood next to each other and watched as people whispered to each other. Some were still recording, while others were texting and sharing information about the terrible things that had happened. The room was full of energy, but it wasn't the kind of energy that Anne had hoped for. It was the energy of truth, as people finally realized who Anne Hathaway really is. As I looked at Will, my heart swelled with pride. He had stuck to his decision because it was the right one. Even though he was with the woman he loved, he had chosen to stay true to his values. You made the right choice, son, I whispered softly, my voice full of emotion. You make me proud. Will was quiet for a moment. He nodded slowly, his face showing a mix of relief and doubt. I'm not sure what to say to you, Dad. I never thought I would have to pick between you and her. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed with someone who didn't respect you. I smiled back at him and hugged him for a brief time. Will, you made the right choice. You did it, even if it wasn't easy. We stood there for a little while, and during that time, it grew harder and harder to understand what was really going on. I was looking at everything the same way Will was. After a lengthy journey that started with sadness, this was the moment in time that had been achieved. I had put Anne through a test, lied to her, and hurt her, all for Will's future, so he would understand how important family and respect are. A few moments after there had been silence, I turned my attention to the door that Anne had slammed shut. I knew that just because she left in a big way didn't mean it was the end for her. There were still a lot of things that will happen to her in the future. Now what, Father? Will asked, his voice softer and with a trace of trepidation. Is this the place we were looking for? Is it true that she has cut herself off from our lives forever? I took a big breath and looked back at him. Will, she has made her choices. And now she will have to deal with the consequences of what she did. The whole world will know the truth about her. It's time for us to move on. We can't let the past get in the way of our progress. Will's face stayed sad, but he nodded again. I don't know whether I'll ever be able to forgive her for what she said about you. This information is hard to understand. Instead, I put my hand on his shoulder. Son, forgiving someone takes time. But remember that what people do is more important than what they say. Anne's actions have shown us what kind of person she really is. We can't change her, but we can change how we react to her. Will thought on what I had said for a long time without saying anything. Then he glanced up at me, and there was a sense of determination in his eyes. I know you're right. All I want to do is go on. I want to leave this behind. I smiled back at him, knowing that this was the right path for us. The storm had passed, and it was time to start rebuilding. There were many difficult arguments and painful times in the weeks that followed. Will and I had to explain things to the family, the other people who had been at the wedding, and the people who had been hurt by Anne's actions. It was important, even though it wasn't easy. It was necessary to tell the truth. Meanwhile, while some people were still shocked, many others thanked Will for his choice. They understood how hard it was to leave someone who had been so cruel and manipulative. Anne's downfall was not just in her personal life, it was also in her work life. The news spread quickly after the wedding ceremony went horribly wrong. Reporters wasted no time in looking into her past, her work history, and the things she has done. Anne's life as she knew it began to fall apart quickly after social media erupted with hashtags like #vegetablegroom and #disabilityrights. Her statements about me were posted online and quickly went viral. The disability rights groups to which I had previously given money quickly joined the cause, demanding that someone be held responsible. It was more than just a public humiliation, it was a complete failure in a professional capacity. After the medical boards, hospitals, and companies that Anne had worked for looked into her past and activities, she was put under investigation. She was ultimately forced to resign from her position as a healthcare administrator, and her medical license was also suspended. The very community that she had previously tried to lead was now turning its back on her, demanding that she take responsibility for her actions. As Anne's world fell apart, mine began to come back together. We had a long way to go, but the foundation was solid, and so was my relationship with Will. I realized that I no longer needed to hide my past. I didn't have to pretend to be someone else or act like someone else. I had spent too many years in the shadows, trying to fit in with people who couldn't see the real me. But at this point, I was able to stay calm. It wasn't just about money, it was also about self-respect. It was about showing the world that you don't have to apologize for being yourself, no matter what other people think of you. Anne's life was a mess, and the only person she could blame was herself. A few months later, we were at a diner in the same place we used to go when he was a kid. It felt like it had happened a lifetime ago. The quiet murmur of the restaurant, the smell of coffee in the air, and the sound of plates clinking seemed to calm my nerves. Will smiled and sat down across from me. He put a picture of his fiancée, E, on the table and said, "I'm engaged." I looked at the picture. Her scrubs, which showed that she was dedicated to helping others, went well with her pretty smile and kind look. "She's beautiful, Will," he said. "She works in pediatric rehabilitation, and she is amazing. She knows what I've been through." I was really proud of him and nodded in agreement. "Son, I'm so happy for you. It looks like you are the kind of person who deserves her." I told her about the trust fund, Will said next. "And I told her the whole story about you. She said she understood why you did what you did." I smiled and said, "I'm glad she gets that." Will looked up at me after a moment of hesitation and said, "Dad, I know it wasn't easy, but I get it now. I understand how you felt when you looked at her and tried everything you could to show me what was really important. I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner." "Will, you don't need to say you're sorry. You've learned the most important lesson, how to recognize people for who they really are instead of what they own or how they look." Will nodded and said, "I am ready to go on with her and you. We want to start a family. This time, I will make sure I do everything right and don't make the same mistakes." I couldn't help but smile. "Son, I'm proud of you. You've grown into the kind of man I always thought you would be." While we were finishing our lunch, I felt a calmness that I hadn't felt in years. The storm had passed, and the truth had come out. In the end, love and respect had won. As you can see, sometimes the truth goes deeper than what we may see at first glance. It's about the things that are not obvious. The choices we make and the values we cherish are what really make us who we are. Will made the hardest choice of his life today. It wasn't easy, but it was the right choice. I can't be any prouder of him for that. This is something I want all of you who are watching to remember: you should never let somebody take away your dignity. Stand up for what is right. Fight for the people you care about. Most importantly, you should never let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve respect, even for a second. If you liked this article, please don't forget to hit the like button. Your support means a lot. You need to subscribe right away if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any of the great material that is coming your way. Please leave a comment below if you want to express your ideas on this. Your opinion is important to us. And, of course, don't forget to share this video with anybody you know who might benefit from hearing it today. Stay strong and true to yourself till we meet again.